Thank you, Charlie, for underlining the key concerns of our industry that we all share despite the region and the languages we are dealing with. So today we are discussing readers, reader behavior, and what the publishing industry is understanding, how we are understanding whatever we are understanding. So we have a big data expert who actually has an eye for tipping points and deviance in that big data, Payal. Welcome. We have a publisher who began his career as a bookseller and therefore has a complete grasp on the reader's pulse. Ananth, welcome. We have someone who started the big data story in the context of Indian publishing industry about a decade ago and has been talking to us in our languages about the big data story. Vikrant, welcome. We have a data maverick who sees the gaps in the big data and is experimenting with the methodology of collecting that big data and is identifying the gaps and is telling us an alternative story. Naresh, welcome. So, the first question, who is reading what? And how do we understand that who is reading what? Shall we start with the lady?
Well, so I wrote this book on the next billion users, and it's not a coincidence that I've been talking only to technology companies in this entire last year. And partly it's because we are in this data-driven economy, and with big data, it's basically who has the most data is going to be at the forefront of any sort of business, right? So it's a sort of a data war. And yet, how do we reconceptualize who the reader is based on this next billion users, considering who are they? Are they the low-income population that has very scarce resources? So when we talk about them as consumers, indeed, we're talking about half the world's population, which is very exciting. But for publishers, they need to look at it as if they're looking at these populations, demographics, consuming in terms of actually purchasing books, that's not going to happen in the near future. However, what is happening is the distribution end, right? In terms of consumption, in terms of promotion. Like, so products, how do these commodities circulate online? How do these next billion users tag them, make sense of them, morph them into different sort of multimodal forms, like from videos to little clips, and basically accentuate and amplify certain speakers, thinkers, ideas. And that can have a tremendous amount of force in the way in which we profile, valorize what constitutes as, influential writing and influential authorship. But what I see with the publication industry right now is they're still deeply conservative because what's holding them back is the library model, right? So they have a safety net and they're very risk averse compared to other sectors. And I know it's changing, but definitely the next billion users continue to be neglected, even though they're very visible, very forceful, and they're changing the game in big ways. So they're just not captured. It is an information deficit in an information glut war. So
I completely relate to you because as Charlie just said before our panel that the publishing industries are actually the media industries now. So are we then talking about, Nareshji, of a different reader-consumer behavior, reader-consumer behavior, or reader/consumer behavior here?
Well, I'm glad you said that because this was part of the email that we would be discussing the next billion users. And I sort of did think about that. And although the work I have been doing in the last few years is about researching consumer behavior of the current readers, people who are coming to book fairs and buying books, and that kind of research. Now, when we are talking about the next billion users, I think one has to keep in mind that in India at least, everything in 2019 in terms of consumption went down. There was a decline in consumption of FMCG products, there was a decline in consumption of cars, motorcycles, everything. Even books were relatively flat, according to our research. But the consumption of smartphones did increase. And the research shows that from 2016 to 2019, over 200 million apps. Now the largest um, population anywhere in the world that downloaded apps on smartphones was India. The increase in those 3 years was 190%. The next country, as far as downloading apps, was China at 80%. The overall worldwide growth is somewhere around 40%. So even Indonesia was only 70%. So I see that the next billion users potentially will be, and the readers, and the multimedia absorbers, listeners, will be these people. But also I think that the next billion consumers will also be the producers. I mean, what we have seen in the book fairs all over the world in the last 30 years, I would say, the aisles are full of authors who the publishers are actually keeping out. If I may say so, in some of the book fairs, there are actually armed guards where the rights area is, so that people cannot get in who don't have appointments. So everybody is an author. And the new world, I think in the next billion so-called readers, you will have a lot of reader authors, you will have a lot of reader publishers, you will have a lot of reader podcasters, and you will have a lot of reader movie makers. So I think the next billion is not going to be a unidirectional process of content. It's going to have to be a dynamic kind of content. And that's my input on that.
Coming to Ananth after this, this seems like a dialogue between between the reader, the consumer, the producer. Can publishing really grapple with this changed way of communication?
I want to borrow a joke that Charlie cracked. I think there are three things. First thing is that grappling with the idea that we have to make content available in as many formats as possible for as wide a demographic as possible, especially in a country like ours. Predominant factor of the apps that downloaded might be TikTok for entertainment, which we have a problem with in India. So that's one. We publish a wide range of writing from not just here, from everywhere in the world, across all its formats to make it available to people to buy it. So to understand who's buying what from where and how are they consuming it. The second problem on that is how many of them are going to
Subscription.
which is the biggest problem here. We all can use the word content, and then content used to be king, then content became queen, and then the content is free, which is the truth. And the third, of course, is what format of this, besides print, is going to be the long-standing investment. The thing about video is that it's one thing to say about 5 years ago, everybody was saying that people are not reading enough and they're watching more. And it is a great idea that publishing got onto the watching space is because if you can't beat them, get better at that game and join them. So can we sell everything to everybody? You know, we are about 250 people company. More than half of them are trying to sell something to somebody at any given time. So do we have enough data? I wouldn't say risk, but is the getting all the data and analyzing it and being actually able to convert that into a sale, which is a present challenge here, is that a lot of the content is free. So to understand who's going to be the paying customer, and can we give them the content in the format in which they want to pay for.
Brilliant questions, and a very, very apt point to get you into the conversation, Vikrant. Are people really paying for the content that's been generated? What does your study say?
I mean, as per my analysis, that we say that people are paying. I mean, it's all about, India is always about value proposition. They pay for the value when they see it. Interestingly, the data suggests that from 2018 to 2019, when we moved, the average selling price of the book have dropped by 8%, while if you look at the UK, in sterling, the average selling price has increased by 2%. It does mean that publisher might be going out and reaching out to the mass market, trying to produce the content in the much lesser the price tag. That's the same formula if you look at the book fair. We were there in the New Delhi book fair. The kind of people walked in, thousands of people, lakhs of people were walked in. And if you look at the sales the publisher would have made, I mean, if you ask, I mean, Ananth will also say the same thing, is from 18 to 19, it must have grown. It does mean that the number of people who are reading in this country have increased. It's all about what content and its format that we want to give it to them. It's the story that publishers should ask. And in the new era, the data has become the oxygen. The more oxygen that you need, the more data you require. And if you write your story around the data, your publishing will become more stronger, and you will be able to deliver more better content to the consumer because you understand more consumer. And that is all about the big data story is all about.
Is Nielsen Bookscan counting the data that is about the readership available on the digital platforms? And let me rephrase myself. Is Nielsen Bookscan capturing the digital readership behavior, or is it just the print?
Bookscan is a methodology which tracks the print because
Okay.
it's by ISBN. We have a separate tool that is that captures and analyzes the data for digital content. So we have the products. It's just that the Bookscan is, as you pointed out, is for the prints.
It's for the print.
Yeah.
So coming to Naresh again after this, the methodology of collecting the data for the Indian languages market especially, because the readers are reaching out to very traditional mom and pop shops. That's the mainstay for the Indian market, Indian languages market. But is the methodology working enough?
Yes, just before that, I'd like to add on reader behavior as far as the trends. We also noticed, I mean, we did surveys of publishers and readers in both the World Book Fair in 2014, JLF also a little bit, and then again in the World Book Fair 2020 that just went by. And we have found that although, I mean, various types of questions, whether, how many people have smartphones, iPads, laptops, and how many people read print books. And in 2014, the feeling among both publishers and readers was that e-books would conquer the world more. I mean, they felt more threatened, or that they would dominate over a period of time. What we did notice in 2020 is that there is a retreat from that position, that they feel that e-books or electronic media will not any longer dominate activity known as book reading. And also, we asked them why. And some of the reasons they gave were that now they have experience with these technologies. There are things like eye fatigue. There are things like when they use these books for studying, they cannot mark them, write them. So it was more moderate response on that front. That means the trend, as Mr. Redmayne also said, there is a decline in the fascination with electronic media. Plus, there are other issues in India where parents don't want their children to have access to computers and iPads as much. They want to control that to some extent. But so there is a moderation there in the migration, or the immediate migration, or the feeling that electronic books will dominate. So there is a reinforcement and regard for purchasing books, etc. Okay, and your question was about languages, how we went about researching the languages. See, we started, we first of all believe in face-to-face interviews. We feel that it's very difficult in India to collect information without deep domain kind of interviews, and that you need to do a lot of interviews. You need to do what are called a large sample, which is stratified, as well as the large sample, which is purposive. And so you need to actually go and meet all three parts of the supply chain. You need to meet the input suppliers, you need to meet the people who produce the paper, the ink, the printing machine. Since we come from that area, our research originates from an understanding of what is being produced in terms of books, in terms of paper and ink and binding and glue and things like that. And then we looked at the processors, who are the publishers, the authors, the printers, and then the end users, who are the buyers, the distributors, etc. And we tried to do this across all the languages. And we started with the use of educational books, both government as well as private publishing. And of course, we have noticed in our research that government publishing and government education in India itself is flat, if not declining, and private education is booming. And in fact, private educational books are perhaps in value at least twice the value of government books. which are huge in quantity and which are subsidized and have a low retail price, but they are nevertheless not increasing because the government's expenditure on education is not really increasing at all. In fact, it has been declining, and this government is threatening to bring it back, but it will, if it brings it back to what it is saying, it will still be below the levels of 2013. So there is a serious crisis in education, etc. Then we went about actually trying to, we visited all the states, we visited all the state textbook corporations, because we still feel that overall there's a lot of headroom for book growth in India. There's a lot of headroom, and this headroom will be, it will actually happen when you have more and more literacy. And not the kind of literacy outcomes that we have now, but better literacy outcomes. And we see some reflection of that in the consumption of trade books in the different languages. So then we actually went to the trade book publishers in various languages and tried to build a pyramid of, who are the lead, like we came to see you also briefly and some of the other educational publishers also, to try and understand who are the leading publishers in each language, and then who would be the others, etc. And we did various other kinds of exercises. And we noticed, for instance, that in the World Book Fair in Delhi this time, there are much fewer exhibitors than in previous book fairs. And of the book, that means it's gone down from 900 exhibitors, publishers, to 500 this time. 500 exhibitors. But out of those 500 exhibitors, 200 were selling toys, and 60 were selling religious books. So there were much fewer what we call genuine publishers. Then, of course, we explored their catalogs of all the publishers. So we get an idea of how many titles are supposed to be in print. And then we actually go out and try and buy books in each language to see what is the validity of the catalogs. That means, do these books actually, are they available, or are they just in the catalog? I mean, so the various techniques, but there is no shortcut. And that is why we are very slow in our research.
I can now understand we have two kinds of data with respect to the Indian market. How do we make peace with these two kinds of analogies, Ananth? Because as publishers, we do understand that we need a heads up with the trends, we need a heads up with what's happening on ground. But here we have, for example, Nielsen Bookscan as the global entity. And here we have IPP's methodology that is actually going down in the grassroots and collecting data in 360 degree. Where is our foot? And where is our door, basically?
We're not anywhere near where we need to be in terms of being able to get authentic data that actually informs anything. So at the moment, what has happened in Nielsen completes about 45% of the market.
Right.
And that data is mostly used to keep a tab on what customers are paying for. What is that walkaway point for a book? And the second, it by and large informs reading habits. Because even if you go into a very large online bookstore, it typically tends to only recommend the same genre that you're reading from. So Nielsen helps. And we're coming from the dark ages pretty much. 10 years ago, there was no Nielsen.
There was no Nielsen.
But the book industry has been growing for 25, 30 years simply by just intuitive editorial processes that says that these are books that you would like to read, and these are books that you're reading, and these are what that we as a publisher and the author's voice that we're bringing. But I'm going to go one step back because we're talking about data. Is the country reading more books? Are more people buying more books? The answer is yes. We have seen a lot more growth in bestsellers across categories. The rise of high volume non-fiction, the rise of children's publishing, the influx and the sustainability of commercial fiction is growing. It's a wider age group of customers who are paying for books and reading, whether it's free or not. Take Wattpad, for example. There's a lot of reading happening there. Yes, it's free, but at some point the hope is they will convert. At HarperCollins, we are in that cusp of being an educational publisher and a trade publisher. At any given time, about 6 million kids are using a Collins textbook. There are about 250 million kids who have access to books, private. They're paying for it. They have digital content that they're seeing. There's a lot of innovation that is coming into the digital force, so we try and identify what age group is consuming what kind of data, whether it's ELT, all the literacy, numeracy, and the science, which is crucial. And we have to just constantly keep reading the messages, as it were, and bridge that gap. I think the gap that exists in terms of the next quantum for growth is that there is truckloads of almost 7 billion going into education purchases across age group. and there is maybe 1/4 a billion going into entertainment publishing. But this intermittent space, where you have a middle class family of which there's large, the parents might not be readers, they want the best for their child, but they don't have that bridge product. So they don't have, like Tali said in the beginning, they don't have enough bookshelves at home. We don't have enough libraries in India. So it doesn't matter whether a child is borrowing a book, but at least a child is beginning to read. So we have here, at least, as a consequence of a multilingual society, economic diversity is that either the parent is able to buy the child very good textbooks, say, I'm going to invest in private publishing, private education for you, and spending most of their revenue there, or they're those who are able to buy an 800 rupee hardback, buy a copy of William Dalrymple or Rajdeep Sardesai and have a good time. What do we do in the interim? Is it a diversity on the price? Is it a diversity of format? Do we have to get them to read more e-books because it's free, you can carry around, you don't need to get a shelf? Do we want you to listen to audiobooks? Those need to happen. And do we have enough data to inform what our next marketing or sales strategy is going to be? No.
So coming with that intermittent space to you, Payal, all the questions that Ananth raised are very, very valid, and exactly the point that where is our door and where we should be putting our foot in. So the big data and the minute deviance that you're looking at, does this supply anything for us into the intermediate space?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts here. One is we keep talking about are consumers buying these products. Now, when we're talking about that, we need to talk about it in terms of data is a currency. So even if people are not actually buying a book, what they're doing is they are buying with their data, right? And they are giving value to publishing companies. So that itself, the conversation has changed in big data, is that it's not something that is that, oh, if I give you cash, thereby I have given you something. Because data now has actual legitimate value. So, and there is a whole conversation about nationalization of data, who owns it, remuneration of data, and so we need to put that into the conversation. The other aspect which we kind of like shy away from is about the piracy of publication material, right? Particularly when you have the next billion users and you have the significant number, particularly in India. Like I'll give you a case in point is, I have a number of Chinese PhD students who just arrived, and they messaged me saying, hey, do you have your book that I can read? I said, yeah, you can check it out in the library. They thought, okay, in 5 minutes, never mind, it's too much of work. They downloaded it from some pirated site. So, and they're like, oh, look at that, I've actually got your book, right? So, and there's, there's this connection to this idea of moral consumption that surely, consumers will feel bad about it, but there's significant studies about moral consumption and consumer intelligence where that's one realm which they are either neutral or they actually think it is perfectly legitimate to pirate text. So where does that leave a lot of these textbooks? You can go into academia.edu, research, ResearcherGate. There's like hundreds of sites where books are downloaded for free. So it pushes publishers to rethink what their business models are. And we can actually look across sectors, right? Because when we go across sectors like Spotify, are they a music company anymore, or are they something more? And actually all these, whether it's a music industry or it's a movie industry, they are actually social platforms now. Because you need to create a added value, like what is India lacking? Spaces of dialogue, critical dialogue, communities of conversation across a diversity of stories which are missing. Majority of the world's population are not represented in current textbooks, right? They don't see themselves, their stories are not captured, and they continue to remain invisible, even though they're giving much value to this game through their data. And so we need to stop seeing that how we are getting ripped off, and now turn it around and saying, how do we give them more value given that we are, taking away a lot of their data, and we are learning through free market research, right? What did the CEO of Netflix say when he realized and they put their mind to it? They said everything we knew about the sociology of categories, age and what, gender, etc., needs to be thrown in the garbage bin. We need to borrow that same template here. Throw away that and let's recluster based on narratives that people want and demand actually, and we owe it to them, right? So yeah, I would leave it at that. Yeah.
Vikrant, would Nielsen Bookscan be able to cater to these changed um, necessities, changed demands from the publishing industry? Because what we are looking at now, that we are also serving intellectual property to OTT, to the big budget cinema makers, to a lot of other platforms like audiobooks, etc. So are we using the book scan in a way that can help us innovate our business model? Can book scan help us do that?
I mean, BookScan is one of the product. I think there are, I mean, in the research that we say that one product can't answer all the questions. We will have, and we have been building and innovating new products so that it answers your multiple questions that publishing industry might have it. So say example, we were testing about a cover page, and people says that the cover page is attract to the consumer, and I answered it yes. I mean, you have to be more innovative while building a new cover page so that it becomes more modernized cover page, so that it attracts to the people. The other thing Ananth said about marketing. Marketing is very important. I mean, I've been talking to someone, it's about when you open a YouTube and the icon comes up that after 5 minutes the ad will disappear and you go to the tube. I mean, you have to be there for 5 minutes. If you spend 5 minutes and your ad or your books is there and you're trying to market something, one would go to that and try. I mean, the objective one has to be that how you bring more and more consumers about and reading the books. In India, is all about that, because if you compare with UK and India, we ask the question that how occasionally or you never read the book. If you talk in UK, it's about 2%.
Right.
While if you see in India, there was a 31% who never read the book. So the objective when you want to increase your consumerism and you want to increase your horizon and publishing and blah, blah, you also need to see that your idea has to be that 2% should say eventually that we never read the book. And that's the whole about tying up marketing plan and all the stuff. And Nielsen is always been there innovatively, as I said, of creating new products so that it answers your questions in publishing or retailer or anyone, even from the language side. I mean, you know the fact that we are not limited ourselves for BookScan, which is the print on the larger on the English side, but also we are trying to establish ourselves in the Hindi reading side, where we come up with a Hindi bestseller chart. The idea is to promote the new authors or in the Hindi side, and I want to do that in other languages, which could be Bengali or Malayalam, which is another prominent languages, so that reader can immediately see that what is happening in the market, and then it helps the publishing program and helps the publisher to sell more books and bring more consumers and more reader to the platform.
Yes, that's a valid story. I'd also like to add, I think that it's for the first time in Hindi that we've had a bestseller list for poetry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that actually helped push the sales last year. I would acknowledge that. I think we can at this point open up our discussion and get the audience in. Questions, comments?
No, I have a question which is not only to the panel but also to the audience, because we have publishers here. When you say data is the currency, I do agree with you. And my question is that is Amazon a very good example of that? In the sense that Amazon is willing to sell your books at a discount simply because they are compiling data about the reader. So they are, in fact, they are treating data as a currency, and they don't mind selling the book at a steep discount, even as they are investing, for instance, in India. And so books are loss leaders for them. So is that a way of buying data?
I mean, Amazon is one of the examples that you're quoting, but if you look at the anywhere in the world, or if you look at the India, the kind of penetration and the smartphone usage is there. There's a huge amount of data, and the data, the big data, the technology that we use it, and artificial intelligence that we technology nowadays everybody uses it. It's all been built up. It's not sitting only at the Amazon side. It's all there in the Google or anywhere which is on the digital platform. I mean, the kind of data, the kind of churning of the data is huge out there. I mean, you can from that data you can build up what psyche is all about, consumerism is doing it, how much time they spend on the internet, what kind of download they do it, and then you can build your story from there. So I think Amazon could be one, but I think there's a much larger picture out there from where we can source the data and build the story for consumerism out there.
Yeah, I mean, we have to also look at it as, I mean, Amazon's not quite, they are a problematic case in a very different way. They are hyper monopoly and they play, I mean, it's not on them, it's because we don't have a free market. It no longer exists, actually. Or I don't even know if it ever did, right? So let's not get diverted with that. But what I mean when I said data as a currency is that I'm talking about the fact that we don't give legitimacy to what people are contributing. Because in this hyper competitive attention economy, how do publishers make certain work stand? How do they make the decisions on profiling certain authors and works? Or how do they plan in the next 5 years where we're going to publish? Like, are we going to go into fiction, non-fiction, which genres? How are we going to recluster genres? Like, are we going by the traditional genres of last year, of the past years? Or can we reconceptualize this clustering? And we just had to go across sectors to understand it. And what the data is doing, which is providing value to publishers, is that it is giving insights, just like what we see with House of Cards, right? An entire TV series was made from deep AI analytics of consumption patterns on Netflix. And then they thereby came up with literally a script. And it did very well. Now, this could be extremely disturbing in many ways, and we don't need to go into that. But the fact is, there's an enormous amount of potential to also look fairly at maybe there are different tastes emerging and complicated user groups that need to be catered to. And it sort of frees us from these sort of biases from from the years before and allows publishers to take more risks. Because actually, or rather, shall we say, reduce the risks, because when they're taking and going into new markets, they can literally see that the data is supporting them, right? Because they're very conservative, at least from what I see, continue to be, because they're working on old templates of what typical, categories are, like women consuming certain kinds, housewives, this age group, blah, 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 which goes into such deep cliches, and it's exhausting. So I think in a sense the raw data, sort of gives a sort of mirror to publishers, to authors, that, what, we need to go beyond our worldviews because there's entire demographics out there that need to be catered to. So I think that's really what I mean, is it's really deep value we are getting, and it's not about what we're getting in terms of are they purchasing this commodity, right? Yeah. So. Yeah.
Maybe a strange question. How would you define, despite branding in this industry, how relevant is branding? Like if I compare FMCG or any other industry, the branding is very essential. How do you define branding here? I don't know whether it's a stupid question or not.
I mean, from the research point of view, if you look at branding is already there. I mean, Amish Tripathi.
Are the publishers the brand or the author the brand?
I mean, both. If you look at consumer recognize or have a recall, we did a study and we tried understanding that what is their recall. They do both. They recall HarperCollins, so they recall German Stilton or any author that you name it. So there is a recall is there. I mean, it's much different from the FMCG. It's not a right way of comparing it, because there you are buying unnecessary goods, which is, I mean, if I ask you, Pepsodent, which company it belongs to, I mean, there are multiple people who might not be able to say whether it's a Unilever or Procter & Gamble. Something similar out here as well. So it is, recall is both sides. They recognize the publisher and also they recognize the author.
Is branding also related to whether it's fiction or non-fiction?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, the reader has becoming more and more smarter, and digital world, you can't avoid that. People understand the fiction, non-fiction, and within that they also understand crime, romance, and all those stuff. I mean, we did a study on the female romance, and we found very interesting, and they understand what are the books are available from which platform they want to read. So yes, I mean, our consumer are more expert now.
Sorry, can I? One more question.
I think
Is
we take
it,
another thing, sir. Can we
just
take the
one
next
more
question?
question.
No, sir,
Is
can we
it
take the
more
next question?
cluttered than FMCG? The branding.
Could I just make a comment, is that besides authors and publishers, what we need to look at is influencers, so we have these sort of like elite versus the masses, right? And now these are disruptive in these dichotomies because we need to look at influencers, say on TikTok, or even not who, but also what, like specific kind of networks on Twitter, like hashtags. Do you get included? Often they're like there are these sort of sorority authors and then fraternity authors, and are you part of like, you have these circulating hashtags saying, oh, the must reads, for example. Who gets in there? Who are the gatekeepers? And these are often the ones who have deep ties to still conventional trusted institutions, often from the West. So there's a sort of neo-colonial fabric which is imposed on these so-called equalizing platforms. So branding is essential, but let's give credence to these new rising stars which have not normally been seen as core in the sort of game, right? And how they're going to disrupt brand management and curation.
Thank you so much for this very informative discussion. I think what's missing. Thank you. I think what's missing is the creativity of conversion from the paper books into the digital formats, and I think that's what's missing from the publishers. So how can, I mean, whether we like it or hate it or whatever, the mobile phones is the future for at least for another 1 or 2 decades. So how can you be a competitor to TikToks or whatever in the books world? It's a creativity element.
No, I think so. One, books are available in an author's work is available in print, in electronic, which is if you read it as an e-book. HarperCollins UK is one of the pioneers in making audio first. All the books that they publish in the UK are also available as an audio format, and as unique as a company we are, we're looking at video.
I'm talking about creativity.
So that's one thing that happened in publishing industry, at least other than other industries, that we've not tried to do the same thing expecting different results. Right. Collectively, the industry across publishing, whether it's education or entertainment, has constantly created new formats, including user-driven content, including getting readers to invest in a book that will be published in the future. There is Wattpad that gets you to write new things so you can be discovered. There is self-publishing, from which very few, but our authors have migrated from being a self-published author to go into being a fully published author in a big house. And content is available across all formats and languages. Who is our competitor? Actually, it's the consumer's time that is our competitor. Currently, they're spending a certain amount in video and some amount in reading. And one of the problems, bring us back to India, the problem here, we can talk about big data. Consumption feeds into data. We're saying 500 million, 900 million mobile phones, 1.2, more mobile phone connections than there are people. But only 50 million people regularly pay for a book. If I take you out of school where it's a forced spend, in a discretionary spend, not enough people are buying books in this country. Now, is that a consequence of language, price, format, just simple availability? Those are the questions to answer. And we are happy to invest in making the content in as many formats as convenient for you to shop at, in the language that you want to buy, and whether you want to buy a book from Timbuktu or Tamil Nadu, it doesn't matter. As a publisher, that's what we bring. And in a highly cluttered world, it is that curated content to answer your brand question. So when we launch a debut author and we go to the world and say, this is the novel that you have to read this year, brand matters. But if you think I grew up on, Earl Stanley Gardner, then you already know what you want to read. It's not soap in that sense. But you know how you want to shave and you want a particular aftershave. So the brand, everything is, you yourself are a brand by the choices you make. And data would mean that we understand what your particular needs are. And if you're Googling for something, this question, if you go and put up HarperCollins tomorrow on a Google site, I would hope that the work we do at the background means that our new bestsellers, links to Amazon, links to Flipkart, or a crossword promotion you're running, occupy your first page. And that's where that data invasiveness will be useful. But we'd like to know what you think and what you want to buy.
So with this, okay. Can we take one last question? Do we have time? Okay, so I think one quick round of closing statements from all of you.
Very small question, very small question. My question is that we are all talking big in terms of data collection and data currency. What is the future of mom and pop publisher? Do they have to pack their shop, or do you feel there's some market for them where they can diversify their thinking and maybe bring out some kind of a boutique publishing company, something like that? Any comments would be welcome.
We call them independents.
Okay, so what is the future of mom and dad publishing? This is my question.
We call them independents, and we are independents, and I think we are going to keep offering variety. We are going to keep offering the tipping points, the deviants. We are going to keep offering backlist that Vikrant talked about, that in the Indian publishing scenario, in the Indian readership scenario, backlist is a very important contributor to the bottom lines of the sales. So we are going to keep nurturing our backlists, and we are going to keep an eye on what could be the future trendsetters. So that's what independents are going to do. Yeah. Thanks. All right, so with this, we take the closing remarks from all of you and bring the panel discussion to the closure.
I think that's one of the challenges in researching the Indian publishing industry is that it is very fragmented. And the question you're asking is that is consolidation inevitable? Because that's what you see among the large publishers, and many of whom actually finance the research at some levels, and who are curious and who have many of the resources to also use the data, perhaps, to do new things. But the fact is, the industry is extremely fragmented and includes a lot of small publishers, and I think these publishers will survive. They will change, they will survive. We expected technology to help them. We had all kinds of theories like long tail, and that Amazon will save small publishers. I think there will be independent publishers in this room who will tell you that Amazon has not saved them. But they are not going to go out of business. So there's a huge amount of understanding needed about what is the future of publishing and what is going to happen to this fragmentation, which I expect will happen further. It will atomize further. That means you will not only be a reader yourself, you will also be an author and publisher.
So that's encouraging.
I can also add that when we measured the market from 18 to 19, and we saw that the industry is growing, we saw the growth of over 7% in this, and I think FMCG also has shown the growth in the Nielsen data. But I think with that note, I can say that the industry isn't good. I think we just leave the consumer to decide which format they want to read it. Don't use the cannibalization because that's gone away. I think what Charlie said that the e-book market was plateaued or whatever it was in the UK and the America, but now it's all tapered down, it's all stabilized. Let consumer to decide which format they want to read, but I think overall the industry is in the healthy side.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to emphasize, firstly, taking the point on creativity, is that every new format pushes us to reformulate how we communicate about our ideas, right? Because there are ideas and then there's the communicating of the ideas. So we tend to get swept up that these formats are what is dictating how the markets are. But in the bottom line is that people are still hungering for fresh ideas, right? And the fortunate aspect is we have multiple formats, from podcasts to YouTube channels, and we've got to step away and think about, well, there are certain sort of platforms which are much more superior to others, because the book indeed used to be a very superior medium, but now with very diverse audiences coming on board, we need to open up our minds that they demand many different formats which make it palatable, engaging, and they can become an engaged reader. And in terms of the mom and pop sort of market, is that I think it is very relevant because people don't just want a commodity, they want an experience. And that will never go away. And the mom and pop are very close to the ground, and they know the nuances of people's needs and wants and aspirations in ways that big data analytics obviously doesn't sort of compute, because it's really still going on the reproduction of a lot of past data. So there's a lot of room because there's always that intangible that will give the edge to mom and pop stores. So.
We should just sell more books, read more books. Either if we can do it independently or we can do it together. That's all. Let's just get more India to buy more books. And then the data will take care of itself.
Brilliant closing remarks. Thank you.